A web of lies. The fallout. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing them on the other side. For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled, letting the silence settle. My hands trembled, my pulse hammering in my ears. 1,000 thoughts clawed at my mind, demanding attention, but one cut through the noise with razor-sharp clarity. I had to take control. Emily had already taken so much from me, my trust, my marriage, my dignity. But I would not let her take my future. Not without a fight. I moved like a man possessed. I grabbed my laptop, pulling up the contact information for a divorce attorney I had bookmarked months ago. A gut feeling, a whisper, of doubt that had lingered in the back of my mind. I should have listened to it sooner. The phone rang twice before a clipped professional voice answered. "Jacob Vance, Family Law." "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I need a divorce lawyer, immediately." There was a pause. "Infidelity?" "Yes," I said. "And I want to make sure she gets nothing." "Good," Vance replied, his voice sharp. "Let's talk strategy." The next move, I didn't sleep that night. I paced through the empty house, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Emily's forced smile, Adam's smug silence, the way she had expected me to simply accept it. I wasn't just betrayed, I was discarded. By morning, my emotions had hardened into something colder. If Emily thought she could waltz into my life, shatter it, and walk away unscathed, she was about to learn otherwise. I started with the finances. I froze our joint accounts, ensuring she couldn't access a single dollar without my approval. Then I contacted my accountant, reviewing every asset under my name. Anything she thought she was entitled to? Gone. By the afternoon, my lawyer had filed the preliminary paperwork. By the evening, Emily was calling. I stared at my phone as it buzzed in my hand. Her name flashing across the screen felt like an insult. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Emily. "Daniel, please, we need to talk." Emily. "This isn't fair." "Can we be civil about this?" Emily. "At least call me back." I blocked her number. She had made her choice. Now, she would live with it. The collapse begins. 3 days passed before I heard from her again. This time, it wasn't through a phone call. It was through my lawyer. "She's panicking," Vance said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "She thought this would be simple. She thought you'd be reasonable." I scoffed. "Reasonable? That's what they always expect from the betrayed." "She's worried about the house," he continued. "Apparently Adam isn't as stable as she thought. They've been arguing. He's not ready for a kid. He assumed you'd be covering some of the financial fallout." A slow, satisfied smile crept across my face. Of course, Adam wasn't ready. Men like him, homewreckers, opportunists, thrived on the illusion of excitement. They loved the thrill of stolen moments, the fantasy of love without responsibility. But reality? Reality was a different beast. I could picture it already. Emily, hormonal and desperate, realizing that the man she left everything for wasn't who she thought he was. The cracks forming in their perfect little dream, and I would make sure those cracks became a chasm. "She wants to negotiate," Vance said, his voice smooth. "She wants to settle things quietly." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the irony. Emily had wanted a clean break, hadn't she? Too late. "Tell her," I said, "that I'm just getting started." Vance chuckled. "I thought you might say that." I hung up, staring out the window as the winter wind rattled against the glass. Emily had built a web of lies. Now I was going to watch it unravel. A web of lies. The unraveling days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Emily's carefully constructed life began to crumble. Her calls became more frantic, her texts more desperate. When blocking her number didn't stop her, she tried, using different ones. When I ignored those, she showed up at my office. I let security handle it. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. But it was what happened next that truly made me realize how fragile her world had become. Adam. Left her. I found out through my lawyer first. Adam's out, Vance said, amusement barely concealed in his voice. According to our sources, he packed his bags and left 2 nights ago. Said he wasn't ready for all this responsibility. I exhaled slowly, a dark satisfaction washing over me. Emily had thrown away everything for that man. And now? Now she was exactly where she had left me, alone. I could only imagine how she felt. The panic, the helplessness, the realization that she had bet everything on a fantasy, and the moment reality hit, her so-called soulmate had abandoned ship. But I wasn't done. She still had my last name. She still had unfinished business with me, and I intended to make sure she felt the weight of her betrayal for years to come. The final blow. The divorce proceedings moved fast. Vance was ruthless, tearing apart every argument Emily's lawyer tried to present. She fought, of course, tried to push for a settlement, for some sympathy. I gave him years of my life, she cried in the courtroom. I met her gaze, my expression blank. And then you threw them away, I said, my voice cold. The judge wasn't sympathetic. The evidence of her infidelity was clear, undeniable. I walked away with everything, the house, the savings, even the car she once claimed was hers. Emily? She walked away with nothing, not even Adam. And as she sat there defeated, her once bright future reduced to rubble, she finally looked at me the way I had once looked at her, with loss, with regret, with the crushing realization that she had destroyed the only man who had ever truly cared for her. But I didn't care anymore. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked past her without a second glance. Emily had built a web of lies, and now she was trapped in it alone. A web of lies, the ruins. She left behind. The gavel struck like a gunshot, echoing through the courtroom. It was over. I walked out a free man, free from Emily, free from her deceit, free from the weight of a love that had long since rotted away. She, on the other hand, had lost everything. As I stepped into the cold air outside the courthouse, Vance joined me, flipping through his notes with a satisfied smirk. Well, he said, that went about as well as it could have. I exhaled, watching my breath cloud in the winter air. She never stood a chance. Vance nodded. Not after what we dug up. Ah, yes. The other secrets. It turned out Emily's betrayal ran deeper than I had first realized. She hadn't just cheated on me with Adam. There had been others. I found bank statements showing money withdrawn at odd times, hotel reservations under fake names, unexplained gifts bought with our shared credit card. She had been living a double life long before she ever introduced me to Adam, and now all those dirty little secrets had been laid bare in court. She had no alimony, no assets, not even the apartment she thought she could keep. She would leave this marriage with exactly what she brought into it. Nothing. Emily's desperation. 3 nights after the divorce was finalized, I heard a knock at my door. I knew who it was before. I even looked. Emily stood outside, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She looked broken. For a moment, I felt something stir inside me. Pity, maybe. Nostalgia. But then I remembered everything. The lies, the deception, the humiliation. And just like that, I felt nothing at all. "What do you want?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She swallowed hard. "Can we talk?" I let out a slow breath, glancing at my watch. "It's late, Emily. I don't know where else to go." A part of me almost laughed. Now she had nowhere to go? Not my problem. I tilted my head, studying her. "What happened to Adam?" Her expression cracked. She looked away, as if embarrassed. He's gone. He left as soon as he realized I wasn't going to get anything from the divorce. Of course he did. Guess he wasn't the one after all, I mused. She let out a shaky breath. Daniel, please. I stayed silent, waiting. I know I messed up, she said. I know I hurt you. That was an understatement. But I'm pregnant, she continued, her voice breaking. I have nothing. No job, no savings. I don't know what to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her fear. She had always been so sure of herself, so confident that she could manipulate her way through anything. But now, she looked lost. Daniel, she whispered, I don't have anyone else. I should have felt something, sympathy, sorrow, even anger. But all I felt was done. Emily had made her choice the day she brought her lover into our home and tried to force me to accept it. She had built a web of lies, and now she was tangled in it alone. I gave her a long, measured look, then slowly, deliberately, stepped back inside and closed the door in her face. The epilogue, a new beginning, weeks passed. Then months. I moved on. Emily tried to contact me a few times, but I never responded. The last I heard, she was couch surfing with distant friends, struggling to find work. Adam had completely vanished from her life, leaving her to deal with her pregnancy alone. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe on some level I did. But mostly, I just felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under the shadow of lies and betrayal. And that was all the closure I need. A web of lies. The ghosts of the past life moved forward, and so did I. The house no longer felt like a tomb of memories. I redecorated, removed every trace of Emily's presence, and found solace in the silence she once filled with her deception. Focused on my work, hit the gym, reconnected with old friends, the kind of people I had pushed away in my blind devotion to a woman who never deserved it. I even started dating again. Nothing serious, nothing rushed, just reminders that there was a world beyond the betrayal. But no matter how far I moved on, Emily lingered like a ghost. I would catch glimpses of her in places I used to avoid. The coffee shop near our old apartment, the bookstore she once loved. Her eyes were always downcast, her movements uncertain. The woman who once carried herself with such arrogance now looked like she was afraid of being seen. I never spoke to her, never approached her. She was nothing more than a lesson now, a cautionary tale. But then, 6 months after the divorce, she came back one last time. A final pliat was late, almost midnight. I had just gotten home from dinner with a woman I was seeing when the knocking started. Slow. Weak. I already knew who it was. Opening the door, I found Emily standing there, barely holding herself together. Her once pristine hair was a mess, dark circles etched beneath her eyes. She was clutching her coat around her swollen belly, 6 months pregnant now. I waited. Daniel, she whispered. I said nothing. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what else to do. I leaned against the door frame. That's not my problem, Emily. She flinched as if I had slapped her. I can't do this alone. I crossed my arms. Looks like you'll have to. Her lips trembled. I made a mistake. No, I said, my voice cold. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, leaving the stove on. What you did, that was a choice. Over and over again. She wiped at her eyes, desperate now. I was selfish. I thought I was in love. I thought Adam... She cut herself off, shaking her head. I was stupid, Daniel. I was so stupid. For the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. Not the regret of being caught, not the regret of losing material things. This was something deeper. But it didn't matter anymore. I had spent too much time mourning the past. I refused to let her drag me back into it. "I don't hate you, Emily," I said, my voice even. "I don't wish you harm. But you and we're done. We have been for a long time." A sob choked out of her throat. I don't even know where to go." I nodded. "You'll figure it out." Then, just as I had before, I stepped back and closed the door. This time, I didn't look back. The epilogue. True freedom. I never saw Emily again. I heard whispers of her struggles, how she eventually found a place to stay, how she gave birth. Alone in a hospital with no visitors. But I never reached out, and she never came back. It was over. For real, this time. And as I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I realized something. For the first time in years, I was free. A web of lies. The life she chose months turned into years. Emily became nothing more than a distant memory, a lesson learned and left in the past. I rarely thought of her, and when I did, there was no anger, no resentment, just indifference. Had moved on. Life had taken me in a new direction, one free of the burden of betrayal. My career flourished, my social life thrived, and eventually, I found someone who reminded me of what real love felt like. Someone honest. Someone who didn't carry a heart full of deception. But the past has a way of resurfacing. It was a rainy evening when I heard her name again. I was at a business dinner when Vance, ever the bearer of interesting news, leaned over with that knowing smirk of his. "You won't believe what I found out today." I barely looked up from my drink. "Enlighten me." He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before sliding it across the table. And there she was. Emily, except she was unrecognizable. Her once pristine beauty was worn down by hardship, her eyes dull, her face gaunt. She looked older than her years, as if life had drained the very essence from her. She was working as a cashier at a small grocery store, barely making ends meet. Her child, Adam's child, was clinging to her leg in the photo, a little boy with his father's eyes. I studied the image for a long moment. Then I pushed the phone back toward Vance and took another sip of my drink. "I don't care." Vance chuckled. "Didn't think you would." And that was the truth. Emily had made her choices. She had built her web of lies, thinking she could control how it unraveled. But in the end, she had trapped herself in it. And me? I had never felt lighter. A web of lies. The weight of consequences. Time had done what it always does. It moved forward without mercy. Years had passed since I had last seen Emily, since I had shut the door in her face and let her walk the path she had chosen. I had built something new for myself, a better life, one not weighed down by the ghosts of betrayal. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. It was on an ordinary afternoon during a quick stop at a local cafe that I saw her again. She was sitting at a corner table nursing a small cup of coffee, her eyes distant. And beside her, in a rickety chair too big for his small frame, was a little boy, her son, Adam's son. The resemblance was undeniable, the same sharp nose, the same unruly dark hair, but there was something else in the boy's face. Something I hadn't expected. He looked tired. Not in the way children do when they stay up past bedtime, but in the way people do when life has already asked too much of them. His clothes were second-hand, slightly too big. His shoes were scuffed. Emily looked worse. She was thinner than I remembered, her once glowing skin now pale, her eyes sunken from exhaustion. The woman who had once thrown everything away for passion, who had laughed in my face as she introduced her affair partner in my own home. She was hollow. And then, as if she had felt my stare, she looked up. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she gave me a small, hesitant nod, an acknowledgement, nothing more. I didn't return it. I turned away, stepped up to the counter, and placed my order, and that was it. No words exchanged. No dramatic confrontation. No final plea for help. Just two people who had once shared a life, now nothing more than strangers bound only by a past neither of us wanted to remember. And as I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, I felt no satisfaction, no lingering anger, just certainty. She had built her web of lies, and she was still tangled in it. I, on the other hand, had finally broken free. A web of lies. The burden. She Bear's life had a strange way of bringing ghosts back to the surface. I hadn't thought about Emily in years, not beyond the occasional fleeting memory, like an old scar that no longer hurt. That brief encounter at the cafe had been nothing more than an echo of the past, a moment I had let slip away as easily as it came. But then, weeks later, the phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something, curiosity, instinct, made me pick up. Daniel? The voice was weak, fragile. I knew it instantly. Emily. I was silent for a long moment. Then, "How did you get this number?" She let out a shaky breath. Vance gave it to me." Of course he did. I made a mental note to strangle my old friend. The next time I saw him, "What do you want, Emily?" My voice was even, unmoved. She hesitated. "I wouldn't have called if I had any other choice." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. "I doubt that." A pause. Then, quietly, brokenly, she whispered, "I need help." The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around her neck. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the exhaustion that came from years of hardship. She wasn't the same woman who had once thrown me away so easily. That version of her had been untouchable, dripping in arrogance, confident that the world would always bend to her will. But now? Now, she was drowning, and she had the nerve to ask me for a lifeline. I let out a slow breath. "You made your choice, Emily." "I know," she said quickly. "I know I did, and I don't deserve anything from you, but it's my son." For the first time her voice cracked. I closed my eyes. Of course, it was always about him now. "He's sick, Daniel." Silence. Something tightened in my chest. "What?" she sniffed, trying to hold herself together. "Leukemia. It came out of nowhere. He's been in and out of hospitals for months, and I can't afford the treatments." I stared at the floor, my mind a blank slate. "I'm not asking for money," she rushed on. "I swear I'm not. I don't know what else to do." For the first time in years, she sounded like the woman I had once loved. Not the liar, not the betrayer, just a mother. A mother who was terrified. I should have felt nothing. I wanted to feel nothing, but I wasn't that man. Not anymore. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. "Where are you?" A broken sob of relief. "Still in town. We're at St. Mark's Hospital." I nodded to myself. Then, against every instinct, against every reason I had to walk away, I grabbed my coat, and I left. A choice that wasn't mine. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Emily was waiting in the hallway when I arrived. She looked worse than before. Her clothes hung loosely off her frame, her eyes dull with sleeplessness. But when she saw me, something flickered in her gaze. Not hope, not expectation, just gratitude. She led me to a small hospital room, her movements slow, hesitant, as if she expected me to change my mind at any moment. And then I saw him. A small, frail boy hooked up to an IV, his skin pale against the hospital sheets. He looked up when we entered. Big brown eyes. His father's eyes. And yet, as he blinked at me, something inside me twisted, because I saw something else there, too. Something of her. Something of the woman. I had once built a life with Emily knelt beside his bed, brushing a hand through his hair. "Hey, sweetheart, this is an old friend of mine." He studied me, curious. Then, softly, "Are you here to help my mommy?" I swallowed. For the first time in years, I didn't have an answer. A web of lies. The debt of the past. I stood there, caught in a moment I never expected to face. A child's innocent eyes locked onto mine, curious, hopeful, oblivious to the weight of history between his mother and me. Emily sat beside him, her hands trembling as she smoothed his hospital blanket. She didn't speak. She was waiting. Waiting for me to decide whether I would walk away for good or stay. I exhaled slowly and stepped closer. "What's your name, kid?" He smiled faintly. "Oliver." Oliver. Not Adam Jr., not some recycled name passed down like a burden. Just Oliver. I nodded. "It's nice to meet you, Oliver." His small fingers gripped the blanket. "Mommy says you're really smart." I glanced at Emily, who looked away, embarrassed. I turned back to him. "She did, huh?" He nodded, his face lighting up, if only for a second. "She says you used to help people solve problems." I frowned. "What kind of problems?" He shrugged. "I don't know, but she said you always figured things out." I let out a quiet breath. I had no idea what Emily had told him about me, if anything at all, but in this moment, none of that mattered. He was sick, and despite everything, despite all, the betrayal, I wasn't cruel enough to let a child suffer for his mother's mistakes. I turned to Emily. "How bad is it?" Her lips parted, surprise flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to ask. She swallowed hard. "It's advanced. The doctors say there's a chance, but the treatments are expensive and Adam," I interrupted, my voice cold. The name landed between us like a dead weight. Her face paled. "He's gone." I stared at her. She lowered her gaze. "He left after the diagnosis. Said he couldn't handle it. I haven't seen him in over a year." Of course he did. Adam Reeves had always been a coward. The moment things got hard, he had done what he did best: run. I clenched my jaw, forcing down the bitterness that threatened to rise. Emily had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. But Oliver hadn't chosen any of this. He was just a kid who wanted to live, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't going to walk away. Not from him. I looked at Emily. "I'll make some calls." Her breath hitched. "Daniel, I raised a hand. "Don't. I'm not doing this for you." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, understanding. Then I turned back to Oliver and gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Let's figure this out, kid." And just like that, without meaning, I stepped back into the web, a web of lies, tangled in the past. The moment I walked out of that hospital room, I knew there was no turning back. I told myself this wasn't about Emily. It wasn't about redemption or revenge or some misplaced sense of obligation. It was about Oliver. An innocent kid caught in the crossfire of choices he never made, and if there was one thing I knew better than anything, it was how to clean up other people's messes. Calling in old favors, I made my first call to Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the best oncologists in the state. She owed me a favor from years ago, something about a high-profile case that needed to disappear before the tabloids got a whiff of it. She picked up after 2 rings. "Daniel," she greeted, voice sharp as ever. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," I muttered. "Listen, I need your help." A pause, then more serious. "Go on." I told her everything, about Oliver, his diagnosis, the financial strain Emily was under. Leukemia in a child. That young, she murmured. That's brutal. I need to know if there's a way to get him into a better program. Something covered, something experimental, anything. She was quiet for a moment. Send me his medical records. I'll see what I can do. I exhaled. Thanks, Evelyn. Don't thank me yet. She hung up. One step forward. Now for the next call. Vance, the man who had conveniently given Emily my number, knowing damn. Well, I wouldn't ignore her plea for help. When he picked up, I didn't bother with pleasantries. You set me up. A chuckle. Took you long enough to figure that out. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What the hell were you thinking? That you wouldn't let a sick kid die just because you hate his mother. I ground my teeth. That's not the point, isn't it? His tone was amused, but there was something else beneath it, something knowing. Look, I get it. You wanted her to suffer. You wanted to wash your hands of all of it. But here you are, making phone calls, calling in favors, because at the end of the day, Daniel... He let the words hang. I sighed. Just tell me what you know about Adam. Vance perked up. Ah, now that's a fun topic. I listened as he rattled off everything he'd found. Adam Reeves had vanished shortly after Oliver's diagnosis, fled the state, changed his number, left Emily to handle everything alone. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was where he had gone. Miami, Vance said. Living large with a new fiancé. And you'll love this. She's pregnant. I closed my eyes. Of course he had moved on. Started over. Left his own son to die while he built a new life somewhere far away. It made me sick. Vance's voice dropped lower. What are you thinking? I opened my eyes, my mind already working through the next step. I think it's time Adam Reeves paid his debts. Revisiting an old ghost. 2 days later, I was on a flight to Miami. I had spent years burying my past, letting go of the anger that had nearly consumed me. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. I had no intention of letting Adam slither away while his son lay in a hospital bed, waiting for a miracle. So I tracked him down. It wasn't hard. People like Adam don't change. They just relocate. I found him at an upscale beachside restaurant, sipping a cocktail, his new fiancée giggling beside him. He looked happy, carefree, blissfully unaware of what was coming. I walked up to his table and stopped just short of him. His laughter died, his expression twisted from confusion to shock to something close to fear. Daniel, I smiled. Miss me? A web of lies. The debt comes. Adam's face went ashen as he looked up at me, his eyes flicking nervously between me and his fiancée, who had grown silent, her smile fading in the face of the tension building at the table. I didn't expect to see you here, Adam stammered, his usual bravado melting away. I could feel the years of resentment and bitterness rising in me, but I kept my voice level, controlled. I wasn't here for any theatrical confrontation. This was business, and business had a clear objective: to make him pay. You know why I'm here? I said calmly, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Your son is dying, Adam. His face twisted as if he'd been slapped. His fiancée's expression went from confusion to growing concern, but Adam didn't seem to care. What the hell are you talking about? I leaned forward, my eyes cold and direct. Oliver, your son. He's in a hospital right now, and you've been running, hiding from your responsibility for months while your son fights for his life. Adam's lips trembled, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. The veneer of his new life, his carefree existence, cracked in front of me. I didn't leave him. Don't give me that bullshit, I interrupted, my tone hardening. You left. You abandoned him, and now, when he needs you more than ever, you're living it up with some new fiancé, pretending you never had a son in the first place. His fiancée opened her mouth, but Adam quickly raised a hand to silence her. I didn't know it would be like this, okay? I didn't know it would be this bad. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't the guilt of a father. It was the guilt of a coward, one who knew he couldn't face what he had done. I stood up, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. You don't deserve that life you've built. Not while your son is wasting away in a hospital bed. Adam's eyes widened. He stood up too, his voice rising in panic. I didn't know. I didn't know what else to do, Daniel. You ran, I shot back, stepping closer to him. You ran because it was easier than facing your responsibilities, easier than being the father your son needed. And now you think you can just walk away? No, this isn't over, Adam, not by a long shot. For a moment I thought he might crumble right there, but then he straightened up, swallowing hard. His voice was low, almost pleading. I'll fix it. I'll send money. No. I shook my head. That's not enough. His fiancée looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was heading. But she didn't interrupt, and I couldn't help but wonder how much she knew about his past, how much she had ignored. I turned back to Adam, my voice lowering. You're going to go to that hospital. You're going to look your son in the eye and tell him the truth. He froze, the words sinking in. What? You'll go there. You'll tell him what you did, that you abandoned him, that you were too weak to be the father he deserved. Adam's face contorted with panic. I can't do that. He's just a kid. Exactly, I said, my words cutting through him like a blade. And it's time you realized the price of your cowardice. The confrontation. The drive to the hospital was a tense silence, broken only by the occasional grunt from Adam as I forced him toward the inevitable confrontation. I could feel the tremor in his body as we approached the doors of St. Mark's. I can't do this, he muttered under his breath, his hands shaking. You don't get to choose anymore, Adam, I snapped. You've already made your choices. Now it's time to own them. We walked into the lobby, and the moment we stepped inside, Emily was waiting for us, her gaze sharp yet filled with something more. Resignation. I nodded toward her, but my eyes didn't leave Adam. It's time. She stepped aside, her voice barely a whisper. He's in his room. Adam didn't move, frozen in the threshold. I can't do this, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I stood still, for a moment watching the man who had once been so full of arrogance crumble. And then I said it, the truth he needed to hear. You're not walking out of here until you do right by him. The words seemed to hit him with full force. His shoulders slumped, his resistance crumbling like brittle stone. He turned slowly, his feet dragging toward the hallway that led to his son's room. I stayed behind, but not far. He wasn't going to get away from this. Not today. When I heard the door open, I followed him down the corridor, moving quietly so I wouldn't disturb the moment unfolding in front of me. Inside, Oliver was asleep, the rhythmic beat of his heart. Monitor a stark reminder of the fragility of life. Adam stood at the foot of the bed, his body trembling as he looked at the boy. And then, in a voice so small it almost seemed like it wasn't his, he spoke. I'm sorry. Oliver stirred, his eyes blinking open slowly. The innocence in his gaze was jarring. I'm sorry, Adam repeated, a web of lies, facing the mirror. I stood there, watching Emily's face as the light in her eyes flickered, a mix of hope and doubt. I knew the look all too well. It was the same expression I had worn 1,000 times before, staring at a reflection. I could never fully recognize Adam had done something, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage. He had apologized, yes, but his absence had been so profound, the pain so deep, that even his words seemed hollow in the face of it. I let out a slow breath, taking a seat beside Emily. For a moment, there was nothing between us but the quiet hum of the hospital and the weight of everything that had come before. The lies, The betrayal, the unspoken things between us, things neither of us had wanted to face until now. "I thought you were done with him," Emily said, her voice breaking the silence. She didn't look at me. "I thought you would walk away." I didn't answer immediately. What was there to say? I wasn't here for her. I was here for Oliver, the boy who didn't deserve to be caught in the wreckage of his parents' mistakes. The boy who still needed hope, even if it was a faint one. "I'm not doing this for you," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "I'm doing this for him." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She swallowed hard, fighting the emotion. "He's so sick, Daniel. I don't know how much longer we have. The doctors said it's a miracle he's even lasted this long, but I don't know what to do anymore." I watched her, feeling a pang of something I hadn't expected. Maybe it was sympathy. Maybe it was pity. But mostly it was a recognition of the woman she used to be, before the lies had taken over, before everything between us had fallen apart. "You're not alone," I said quietly, though it was clear. I wasn't offering her comfort. I didn't have that right anymore. She looked up at me then, the rawness in her gaze stripping away whatever facade remained between us. "You're staying?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. I nodded. "For Oliver, not you, but I'll make sure he gets a chance. I owe him that much." Emily blinked, processing my words, the walls between us seeming to shift, if only for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't respond. There was nothing to thank me for. I wasn't here to be a hero or a savior. I was here to fix a wrong, to clean up someone else's mess. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, part of me still needed to make sure that Adam didn't get away with what he had done. A reckoning long overdue. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings with doctors, and trying to navigate the fractured landscape that had once been a family. Adam stayed away. I didn't expect him to come back, but I did expect him to keep his word. After all, he had made one promise, to at least try. But when I called his cell to follow up on his vow to stay involved, I was met with nothing but voicemail. It wasn't a surprise. He wasn't going to change. Not really. He'd made his peace with abandoning his son, and now his cowardice would catch up with him in a way he couldn't avoid. But there was another call I needed to make, one that I had put off for too long. The call to Vance. I found him at a cafe on the outskirts of town, sipping coffee like he had all the time in the world. He didn't acknowledge me as I sat down across from him. He just watched me, a smug smile playing at the edges of his lips. "You've been busy," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I didn't waste time. You knew Adam was going to bail. You knew he wouldn't do the right thing." Vance's smile only grew. "I knew what I was dealing with. You should have too." I narrowed my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a chance to prepare?" He shrugged, the indifference in his movements grating against my nerves. "It wasn't my job to prepare you. I just made sure the pieces fell into place. You had to see it for yourself." I clenched my fist, fighting back the urge to lash out. "And what exactly do you expect me to do now?" Vance leaned in, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. "Fix it. You're good at that, right?" I glared at him, knowing full well he wasn't asking for a favor. He was toying with me, watching me struggle against a system I had long abandoned. "You owe me," I said quietly, my voice low and dangerous. Vance raised an eyebrow, his smile still unwavering. "Owe you?" "For Oliver," I clarified. "If you don't fix this for him, I will." A beat of silence passed between us. Then Vance exhaled slowly, as if weighing his options. "I didn't think you had it in you, Daniel," he said, finally. "But all right. I'll make a call. But you need to understand, this isn't just about Oliver anymore. It's about the bigger picture." I leaned in, my eyes hardening. I don't care about the bigger picture. I care about that kid. You'd better make sure he has a future. Vance looked at me, the playfulness gone from his expression. For a moment, I thought, a web of lies, the price of redemptions. The weeks passed. I watched from the sidelines as Oliver's condition fluctuated, sometimes improving, other times deteriorating rapidly. The experimental treatment was a gamble, but it was the only option left. For all the pain he had endured, there was still a glimmer of life left in his eyes, something worth fighting for. And somehow, that became my anchor in a world that had been built on deception and loss. Adam had disappeared completely, refusing any more contact. His silence spoke volumes, louder than any words ever could. Emily was left holding the pieces, doing what she could, but the weight of everything had taken a toll on her. She was a mother now, and her every action seemed fueled by a mixture of guilt, determination, and hope. But I could see it. I could see how lost she was, how she was trying to be everything for Oliver, while the fractures of her past continued to pull her under. I couldn't help but wonder if she ever regretted it. The lies, the betrayals, the choices she made that led us here. In a way, I was both part of her redemption and the reminder of everything she had ruined. I had no answers for her. I didn't even know what I wanted from her, but I stayed close. For Oliver. The reckoning one evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the hospital room, I found myself at the doorway, watching Emily sit beside Oliver's bed. She was reading to him, her voice soft and soothing, but her eyes were distant, as if she were already somewhere far away. Her fingers lightly brushed through his hair, but her mind was somewhere else. I hesitated, unsure whether I should enter. For the longest time, I had been an outsider to this family. But now, with Oliver fighting for his life, it felt wrong to stay away. I stepped inside, and her gaze snapped up, surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to still be here. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I didn't have a good answer. "I came to see if you needed anything." Her eyes softened a little, though there was an edge of resignation to them. "I don't know what to do anymore, Daniel. It feels like we're running out of time." I looked at Oliver, his face pale and fragile against the white sheets. He was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady for now. "You're doing everything you can," I said, my voice quiet. She shook, her head, her tears threatening to fall again. "It's not enough. I don't know how to fix this. How to fix everything that's gone wrong." I couldn't find the words to comfort her. There was no easy fix. There wasn't a way to undo the past, the hurt we had caused each other, the fractured promises that lingered between us. But there was something else. There was the possibility of redemption, if only we could find a way to reach it. "Maybe there's nothing to fix," I said slowly. "But that doesn't mean you give up on him. Don't give up on him. He needs you now more than ever." She looked at me, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "I've failed him so many times already, Daniel." "You haven't failed him. You've been trying. That's more than most people ever do." Her lips trembled as she turned back to Oliver, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep going like this." I understood that feeling more than she realized. The weight of the past, the pain of trying to piece together a broken future, it could bury you if you let it. But there was one thing I had learned through all of this. You couldn't walk away when it mattered most. Not from your son. Not from the family you still had left. The silence stretched on between us, thick with all that remained unsaid. Finally, I spoke again, more for myself than for her. "Sometimes it's not about fixing everything. Sometimes it's just about showing up, even when you don't have the answers, just showing up." She turned back to me, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I don't know how to show up anymore, Daniel." I took a deep breath. the weight of everything bearing down on me, yet somehow still able to find clarity in the middle of this storm. You keep showing up because he needs you. That's enough. The turning point. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and late nights spent pacing the sterile halls. The doctors continued to monitor Oliver's condition, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the end was approaching, that we were nearing the point where there would be nothing left to do but accept what we couldn't control. And then, in the quiet of one evening, something changed. Oliver's condition stabilized. He woke up and asked for his father. The words hit like a shockwave. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had been preparing herself for the worst, but now, the possibility of hope had crept back in. She was afraid that this brief moment of improvement would be fleeting, that it was just another false hope, but it was real. I could see it in Oliver's eyes. The return. The sun was just beginning to set when Adam finally appeared at the hospital door. His face was drawn, eyes weary, but there was something different about him now. The man I had once known, the man who had betrayed all of us so recklessly, seemed smaller somehow. The weight of his own failures hung over him like a dark cloud, but there was a flicker of something. Regret, maybe. Or just the realization that he couldn't escape the consequences forever. Emily didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, holding the phone in her hand as if it had been some kind of lifeline she was still unsure whether to cast. Away or hold on to? Oliver's asking for you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no anger in her tone, only exhaustion. She had long stopped waiting for an apology from him. She didn't need it. Not anymore. Adam stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before he crossed the threshold into the room. He was shaking, but it was hard to tell whether it was from nerves or something deeper. Guilt, fear, 1,000 emotions that had been buried for too long. Oliver was lying in bed, pale but awake, his tired eyes tracking Adam's every move. The moment their gazes locked, something shifted. The years of silence between them, the betrayal, the heartbreak. Everything seemed to dissolve for just a heartbeat. There was only the raw truth of father and son. "Hey, buddy," Adam said. His voice cracked, thick with emotion. He didn't sit. He just stood at the foot of the bed, unsure of what to do, like he was waiting for the ground beneath him to shift again. "Where have you been?" Oliver's voice was soft, fragile, but full of the same piercing clarity that had once made him the bright, curious boy I had watched grow up. Adam swallowed hard, his lips trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was drowning in his own words, lost in the weight of everything he had done. "Sorry," he finally muttered. "I'm sorry for everything, for not being here, for not being the dad you needed." His eyes welled up with tears. "I failed you, Oliver. I failed both of you." There was a long silence, one that felt like an eternity, as the gravity of Adam's apology settled over the room. I wanted to say something, to remind him that apologies were a start, but they couldn't undo the years of damage. But I said nothing. This wasn't my moment. This was for them. Oliver's eyes softened, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach out, but the pain in his body kept him still. "I just wanted to see you again," he whispered. "I just wanted you to come home." The words struck Adam like a physical blow, his face crumbling under the weight of them. He moved closer, slowly, carefully, as though unsure if he was allowed to touch him. But when he did, when he took Oliver's hand in his, it felt like the room exhaled. There was no grand gesture, no miraculous reconciliation, but there was something in the way they held each other's gaze, a flicker of the connection they had once shared. "I'm here now," Adam said, his voice low and steady, "and I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. To fix me. A new beginning? The following days were quiet. Adam showed up every day after that, his presence almost strange in its consistency. He stayed longer each time, always at Oliver's side, doing what he could to make up for lost time. He had a long way to go, and so did Emily. She didn't make things easy for him. Her eyes were still filled with the weight of the past, but she didn't push him away. She kept a safe distance, as though unsure if this version of Adam was one she could trust. But Oliver seemed to want it. He seemed to want his father back, wanted to believe that they could be a family again, even if it was just for the time. They had left. I stayed out of the way, but I couldn't help but notice how Emily's walls had started to come down, little by little. She was letting Adam in, even if it was through the smallest cracks. For the first time in a long while, she seemed to allow herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this new version of Adam could be someone who could help heal the wounds of the past. I watched from a distance, not wanting to interfere, but my own feelings about the situation were complex. Part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, to stay in my role as the outsider, the man who had been wronged and had watched it all burn. But another part of me, the part that had seen what this family could have been, wanted to believe in the possibility of second chances. For Oliver, for Emily, for Adam. The final test. The day finally came when the doctors gave us the news. The treatment had worked, Oliver's condition was stable, and his prognosis had improved. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a fighting chance. Chance that wouldn't have been possible without the experimental treatments and the care he had received. There was still a long road ahead, still more battles to fight. A new horizon. The weeks following Oliver's recovery were a strange kind of limbo. Things were neither perfect nor fully repaired, but they had changed. For the first time in years, I saw Adam doing his best to show up day after day. He wasn't the man he had been. The selfish, irresponsible man who had caused so much pain. He had been replaced by someone who was trying, stumbling at times, but trying nonetheless. And for the sake of Oliver, I allowed myself to acknowledge that this effort mattered. It wasn't everything, but it was something. As for Emily, she was in a constant tug-of-war between holding on to the past and opening her heart to the future. I could see it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, and the quiet hope. It was like watching someone on the edge of a cliff, not sure whether to jump or step back. I understood that feeling, maybe better than anyone. But where I had once been caught in a cycle of anger, of wanting retribution, she was caught in a cycle of forgiveness. Unsure whether it was too late to forgive herself, too late to fix the damage that had been done. I had my own demons to fight. My anger had burned so hot, so fiercely, that the ashes were still smoldering even if I tried to put them out. It wasn't just Emily and Adam who had broken my trust. It was myself, too. For all the pain I had felt, for all the ways I had wanted. To avenge myself, I had lost something in that fight. My ability to just be present, to find peace in the moments that truly mattered. But life, in its strange way, had a way of pushing you forward, of making you confront what was broken and teaching you that maybe, just maybe, you could heal in ways you didn't expect. An unexpected visit it was a rainy Tuesday when everything shifted again. I had just finished a meeting at work, trying to focus on something, anything, that could offer a distraction from the heavy thoughts in my mind. As I sat at my desk, staring at the clock, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, half expecting it to be a colleague or an administrative assistant delivering some kind of paperwork. Instead, it was Emily. Her presence threw me off balance. The moment she stepped into the office, her eyes met mine, tired but resolute, as though she had made a decision. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low. I motioned for her to sit, wondering what had brought her here, knowing full well it was more than just a casual visit. "Is everything all right with Oliver?" I asked, concerned. She shook her head slowly, as if the question was trivial compared to what was really on her mind. "It's not about Oliver," she began. "It's about us." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. We hadn't really talked much about us since that night, since the phone call, since the moment Adam had reappeared in our lives. We had stayed in the same orbit, caught in the whirlwind of everything that had happened, but we hadn't really confronted what had been broken between us. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice faltering only slightly, "about what you said. About showing up, about trying, even when you don't know how." My heart hammered in my chest. She was taking a risk now, in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about moving forward. "I've been scared," she continued. "Scared of what I've done, scared that it's too late to make anything right. But I can't keep running from it. I need to face it, and I think you deserve to hear it, even if it doesn't fix anything." I leaned forward, a mix of anticipation and apprehension knotting my insides. "What are you saying, Emily?" I asked quietly. Her eyes softened as she spoke, her voice trembling just slightly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even sure if I deserve it. But I think it's time for me to start being honest. To you, to myself, to everyone." I wanted to speak, to tell her that forgiveness didn't come easy, that it wasn't a simple thing. But in that moment, I realized something. Forgiveness, like healing, was a journey, not a destination. "You've been carrying this weight," I said, "for so long. And I think you're right. You can't keep running from it." Her lips parted as if she were about to say something more, but instead, she just nodded. There was no grand revelation, no climactic apology, just two people sitting across from each other, acknowledging the hurt that had been done and the slow, tentative process of making things right again. I didn't know where this would lead, where we would go from here. The future was still as uncertain as ever. But in that moment, I realized something important. We were both trying. And sometimes, that's all you could ask for. The journey. Ahead days turned into weeks, and the small steps Emily and I took toward healing began to add up. Adam kept his distance from us, focusing on his relationship with Oliver. Emily didn't press him for more. She didn't try to force him into a role that wasn't his to take. The quiet aftermath. It's strange, really, how life can feel both still and tumultuous at once. The weeks that followed our conversation at the office passed in a blur of small moments, long conversations between Emily and I that had once been impossible, and longer silences between Adam and me that seemed to speak volumes. The tension between us was a constant undercurrent, but something had shifted. We were no longer trapped in the quicksand of betrayal and anger. Instead, we were standing at the edge of a new chapter, unsure but willing to step forward. Oliver's recovery, though still slow, was remarkable. Each day he seemed to grow stronger, more determined. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, and that sense of cautious hope became a lifeline for all of us. It wasn't just the physical healing that mattered, it was the emotional rebuilding, the fragile trust that needed to be reforged, piece by piece. I could see the strain on Emily's face as she balanced her emotions between us all. She was still dealing with the wreckage of the past, but I noticed the way she spoke to Adam now. Less defensively, more like two people who were learning how to coexist, even if the past still haunted them both. There was no map for this journey, no clear instructions on how to navigate the emotional maze we found ourselves in. We were all simply moving forward, with the understanding that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, a continual movement towards something better. The turning point one evening, as the sky began to darken and the last remnants of daylight vanished. Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. There was no immediate urgency in the moment, no pressing need for words, just the simple act of being present together. For the first time in a long while, I found myself content in the quiet, no longer needing to fill the space with questions or fears. But then Emily looked up at me, her eyes still holding some of that guarded weariness. "There's something I've been thinking about," she said, her voice measured, almost hesitant. I put down my mug and gave her my full attention. I knew from the way she spoke that it was important. "What is it?" "I've been trying to figure out how to move forward. Not just with Adam, not just with everything, but with me," she said, the vulnerability in her voice raw and unguarded. "I've been so focused on trying to fix what's broken between us, trying to make sense of the wreckage, that I forgot about myself, about who I am outside of all this. And I need to find that again." Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were new, but because I knew exactly what she meant. I had spent so much time trying to make sense of my own emotions, trying to find closure, that I had neglected the most important part, finding peace within myself. There was so much I wanted to say, so many things I felt she deserved to hear. But in that moment, I knew I had to let her go in a way. Not permanently, but in the way she needed to be free of the past, to carve out her own space in the world. "You don't need to apologize for that," I said softly, my voice steady. "We're all trying to find our way in this. But whatever you need, however you need to grow, I'm with you. I want you to find yourself again." She nodded, a faint smile flickering on her lips. There was something cathartic in her admission, as though the burden of guilt and self-blame had been lifted, even if only slightly. It was a small step, but it felt significant. The next step, it wasn't long after that conversation that Emily began to take her first steps toward reclaiming her independence. She started meeting with a therapist, seeking the help she had long avoided. And I saw the shift in her, subtle but powerful. She began to laugh more freely again, her eyes brighter. It wasn't a magical transformation, but it was progress, and that was enough. As for Adam, he continued to keep his distance from me. The tension that remained between us was never entirely erased. But one evening, out of nowhere, he approached me while I was sitting on the porch, looking out over the quiet street. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of damp earth and possibility. "I know I don't have the right to ask this," Adam began, his voice low. "But is there any chance that we could—" His words trailed off, and for a moment, the silence felt like the weight of years. But I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. I had learned by then that some things needed to be said slowly, with the time and space to grow. "You don't have to ask for my forgiveness," I finally said, my voice calmer than I had anticipated. "But if you want to be part of Oliver's life, part of this family, you have to show up. Not for me, but for him. You've got to keep proving you're here for the long haul." Adam nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. "I'm here," he said quietly, "and I'll keep showing up. For him. For you, too."